The being of God proved from the frame of the material world. Sermon 1 of Discourses Concerning the Being and Natural Perfections of God by John Abernethy. Romans chapter 1 verses 19 and 20, quote, "Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead." End quote. The mind of man, by attending to its own constitution and to the state and appearance of the world, is naturally led to an inquiry concerning the origin and causes of things, the proper measures of its own conduct, with the consequences of them, and to future events as far as it can attain the knowledge of them, that is, to an inquiry concerning God and religion. When a man, endued with all the vital, sensitive, and intellectual powers which belong to his nature, and arrived at the perfect exercise of them, with a competent knowledge of himself, and the various relations and uses of things about him, when, I say, he deliberately views the obvious face of nature, when he beholds the vast expanse of heaven, the glorious light of the sun, and by it a numberless multitude of other objects, many of which he knows by his senses, his appetites, his affections, and experience, are in different ways useful to him and to each other, reflecting at the same time on his own being, his various powers and perceptions, one would think he could scarcely avoid such inquiries as these. Whence am I, and by what power produced? Whence all these beings with which I see myself surrounded? As I have no other knowledge of my existence, nor any other way to judge of its duration than by conscious perception, I must conclude that some time ago I was not, for I had no consciousness nor perception of anything. How then is this wonderful transformation from non-existence into being to be accounted for? Is it to be attributed to a superior designing cause? And has that same mighty intelligent cause formed all those other things I perceive, which by their appearances seem to be related to each other and to me, so as to make up one entire system? But now that I find myself in such a situation, what am I to do? There are instincts in my nature, which prompt me to various actions and enjoyments. I am furnished with the instruments of sensation and motion. I see and hear and taste and smell and feel. I can move the organs of my own body, and by them some other bodies, merely by an act of my own will, or the voluntary exertion of an inward self-determining power. I have hunger and thirst at certain returning seasons, and am readily supplied with meat and drink, whereby this body is nourished and sensibly refreshed. This is common with me to a multitude of living things in different shapes, with which the earth is stored. But I find in myself the powers of reason and higher affections, whereof they give no discovery, which leads me to conclude there is a nobler end of my being, and I am capable of a greater happiness. I can reflect, compare my own perceptions of things, and inquire into their origin and tendencies. I perceive at first view some truths, and they give me pleasure. I investigate others by a deliberate attention to my own ideas, and to their agreement and relations, still with a growing satisfaction. I am conscious of liberty or of freedom of choice, and the ideas of right and wrong in action naturally occur to me. I must therefore be directed in my conduct by a regard to that difference. I find benevolence to sensitive beings, especially those of my own kind, naturally arise in my mind, together with reverence and gratitude to a superior nature, the supposed author of my existence and of all my enjoyments, which affections, as they are reflected on with delightful self-approbation, are more excellent enjoyment than any sensible object can yield. So they are accompanied with a desire to please that superior being and be approved by him. But how shall I continue possessed of existence, with all the variety of enjoyment that belongs to it, which is so very desirable? And since experience convinces me that the present life is frail, and has in it a mixture of unhappiness, what prospect have I of a future state? For the thoughts of falling again into nothing fill my mind with horror. And how shall I attain to the highest perfection I am capable of? For it plainly appears that, at least, the nobler powers of my nature may admit of a more various exercise than the present, and a further improvement. all that is possible for me to do as an intelligent agent, whereby I may contribute to my own happiness and answer the end of my being, is to follow the guidance of my own reason and what nature points to, considering the whole of my constitution, and preserving the just subordination of its lower to its superior parts, and for the continuance of my being, and what additional felicity I may desire or expect, I must hope in the same supreme power and goodness, to which I owe all that is now in my possession. If these are the inquiries and the sentiments which the mind of man, unbiased by any prejudices or prepossessions, would naturally fall into, and whether they are or not, let anyone judge who carefully attends even to the most obvious appearances in the human constitution, we may consider whether they are not very becoming us. It is true, we grow up to the exercise of our reason gradually. The first part of life is passed over with very little reflection. The world is become familiar to us. We have learned the use of things and opinions concerning them, which engage our assent and our affection before we come to the maturity of understanding which is necessary to qualify us for a thorough and rational examination. But neither the familiarity contracted with our own existence and the world, we cannot but be sensible that our knowledge of both is of no long standing, nor any prejudice we may have received in a childish, immature state, should divert us, when we have attained to the full use of our reason, from attending such important inquiries, which the least self-reflection will show to be every way worthy of men. Whether our inquiries will rationally end in religion, founded on the belief of a deity, is what I am now to consider. This, however, seems to be the plainest and most natural way of attaining satisfaction in that great point. For by the deity we mean the powerful, wise, and good parent of mankind, the maker, preserver, and ruler of the world. And how shall we know him but by the characters of his perfections stamped upon his works? Thus the apostle argues in my text, quote, "That which may be known of God is manifest to men, for God hath showed it unto them," end quote, by their own reason. Quote, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead." End quote. It is certain the belief of a deity has generally obtained among mankind, excepting the objects of the mind's immediate intuition and of sense, concerning which there can be no dispute. Excepting these, I say, perhaps there is not any one point to which men have more universally given an explicit assent than the being of God. This is thought by some to be a strong presumption in its favour, for they allege nothing but the clear, irrefragable evidence of truth could have induced all nations of the world to agree in it. As to vulgar opinions, acknowledged to be erroneous in other points, such as the magnitude and distance of the heavenly bodies, the case is very different. For there the error plainly arises from inattention, and forming a judgment too hastily upon the report of sense, concerning appearances which it cannot examine. But in such a point of speculation as the existence of the deity, to the knowledge of which we are led by our own most obvious reflections, and which the more it is attended to, the more firmly it is believed, and uniform agreement seems to proceed from the voice of nature, or God himself speaking intelligibly to every nation by his works, there is, undoubtedly, in the human mind, a knowledge of things which are not the objects of sense. Nay, in many instances, reason corrects sense and discovers its mistakes. Indeed, the greatest certainty we have is in the clear perception of an agreement between our own abstract ideas, so that a concurring persuasion concerning propositions formed of such ideas, and concerning rational deductions from them, has the best appearance of being founded on truth, because in them men are least obnoxious to deception. There have been, however, some, very few of mankind in comparison, who have professedly denied the being of God, and pretended to account for the formation of the world and all the phenomena of nature without him. These men ridicule the common belief as superstitious, proceeding wholly from ignorance of causes, political fiction, customary tradition, or the passion of fear, which often produces groundless imaginations. I may afterwards have occasion to examine these pretenses. In the meantime, without resting this first principle of all religion on the presumption in its favour, taken from the general consent of mankind, or any other presumptions, however strong, I shall proceed directly to establish it by clear evidence of reason, in the method which appears to me the most simple and natural. Only let it be observed that the notions of men concerning the deity and his attributes have been very confused and their opinions widely different, even theirs who agree in the professed belief of his being. Some have declared themselves unable to form any idea of substance distinct from body, and therefore concluded that as the human soul is only a subtle kind of matter, or a particular modification of it, so God himself is corporeal. This way of thinking, though very gross, is plainly discovered in the writings of the celebrated Stoic philosophers, mixed at the same time with noble sentiments concerning the divine moral perfections and providence. Some conceived that the creation of material substance was absolutely impossible, though it is entirely subject to the disposal of active intelligence, and that therefore it must be coeval with the Supreme Being, whom they imagined to be the eternal soul of an eternal universe. Others seem to have denied the unity of the Godhead. At least, they divided their worship among a plurality of divine beings, so called, though 'tis probable the polytheism of the Gentiles is to be understood concerning a multiplicity of inferior agents in the divine administration, or ministering spirits, all subject to the one supreme. Others, again, have so perplexed the doctrine of the divine eternity and immensity as to render them unintelligible. But above all, the errors concerning the moral perfections, as they are most pernicious, have been the most frequent in the world, the Christian world itself not altogether excepted, not to mention the gods of Epicurus, which he imagined, or pretended to have imagined, to be a kind of indolent happy things, neither the makers nor rulers of anything, but like other beings, made out of atoms by accident. I say pretended to have imagined, for it is not unlikely that part of his scheme was a compliment to the religion of mankind, or rather a sneer, such as is not unusual with writers of his sort. The heathens had, many of them, very absurd conceptions of the morals of their inferior gods, and Jupiter himself was far from being perfectly pure and good. There are, even among those who have the best means of instruction, very gross opinions, and of a dangerous tendency, concerning the justice and goodness of God, and the measures of his government over moral agents, which it is needless now to insist on more particularly. The use I shall make at present of this observation is, to avoid at our entrance on this subject a particular definition of the deity, by enumerating all the perfections which I hope we shall, in the sequel, see reason to attribute to him, because the present controversy is only with atheists, not with any, even of the most imperfect, theists. Besides, I think, in such an inquiry, we ought to begin with the plainest principles, that having once seen them established with clear evidence, we may then proceed to points less obvious. Thus, if it first appears by convincing proof that there is an intelligent designing cause in the universe, to which the order and appearances of it are to be ascribed, we may thence take our rise to the consideration of the characters of that cause, and so by degrees advance to the most complete notion of God which we can form. I shall therefore consider the subject before us in the simplest view, and begin with an inquiry into the true cause of the visible frame of nature, stating the question, as it thus plainly stands between us and our adversaries, whether the material world, with its principal and most obvious phenomena which fall under our observation, is formed and guided by mere chance or blind necessity, which are the different hypotheses of atheism, and I shall examine them severally, or if, on the contrary, it was produced by and is under the direction of an active, understanding, and intending cause. In order to this, let us first consider the ideas of intelligence and activity, of cause and effect, and of necessity and chance, which arise in our minds, by attending to what passes in them, and by observing what our senses inform us of in the ordinary course of things. Perception is always and necessarily accompanied with consciousness. That a man sees and hears, and remembers and understands, and reasons and desires, and wills, needs no proof to him, nor indeed is capable of any, nothing being so evident to his mind, not the very existence of anything without him. Nor is it possible, without consciousness, to convince a man of any operation or perception in his own mind. Our agency, from an inward self-determining principle, is as well known to us as our passive perceptions are. As we cannot help seeing, hearing, perceiving pleasure upon some occasions, and pain upon others, whether external or internal, we are as sensible that we can, without a consciousness of any necessity impelling, turn our attention to one object in preference to another. We can recall the ideas which have been formerly in our minds. We can variously associate them, compare and examine their relations to each other, conscious that these operations do not arise from without, but depend wholly upon ourselves. And we are equally sensible that some corporeal motions proceed from the determination of our own wills. Our bodies begin to move, or particular members of them. Some other bodies also are moved by their force, and all such motions are continued or stopped, while we are not conscious of anything whereby either the continuance or cessation are produced, but our own simple volitions. Hence arise the notions of free or voluntary agency, and necessity as distinguished from it, and of cause and effect. Such powers as we find in ourselves, we can easily conceive to belong to other beings, either in a greater or lesser degree. As we have clear evidence of perception and spontaneous motions in other animals, though different in kind from, and both of them much more confined than ours, so there is no difficulty in apprehending that there may be intelligence of a much larger comprehension than the human, and a more extensive activity, producing more numerous and vastly greater effects. We have at the same time the idea of what is called passive power, or a capacity of being moved and changed, for we can move our own bodies and alter the situation, the external form and the sensible qualities of other bodies by the use of proper means, which we have learned by observation and experience. And these bodies we find to be constantly and uniformly liable to the same or the like alterations by active force. Whatever appearance there is of action in this sort of beings will be found upon closer attention to be really no action at all. A man can easily distinguish between walking and being carried, between the involuntary motion of his hand and that which depends solely upon the command of his own will. In the one, he is an agent, in the other, wholly passive. In like manner, a stone falling, which we do not conceive to move from an internal principle, because no power of self-motion ever appears in that kind of being, is no more active than the earth on which it makes an impression, or the human body which it bruises, occasioning a sensation of pain, and for other corporeal action, so-called, producing various and considerable effects, such as that of fire and air, it can only be attributed to the intestine motion, not spontaneous, of more subtle material parts, and therefore is no more properly action than the motion of entire solid bodies, whose parts are at rest among themselves, that is, do not at all change their situation with respect to each other. Thus we are led to distinguish between the positive ideas of blind necessity and intelligent activity as directly opposite to each other, the one belonging to a cause, the other to an effect. Indeed, the negative idea of necessary existence is not self-contradictory, no more than that of infinity. But to say that unintelligent necessity operates must, I think, appear to our minds to be a contradiction in terms. It is to assert operation, and at the same time deny it in a proper sense, and to destroy the very notion of activity, which yet we know as clearly as we do our own existence, being equally conscious of it. There may be, 'tis true, a train of necessary effects, as in the instance of motion communicated to various inanimate bodies, one impelling another successively, and the prior has the appearance of causing the posterior, but really they are alike passive, and to imagine that they operate is to confound the most inconsistent notions of acting and being acted upon, and as thus the ideas of cause and effect, of active and passive power, of agency and necessity, take their rise from an attention to ourselves, our own minds and our bodies, so we cannot avoid observing the same difference among all other beings which we know. I have not indeed the same intuitive knowledge of another man's conscious activity as I have of my own, but yet I have such evidence of it as excludes all doubt, nor can I question but that the earth I walk on, the pen I hold in my hand, and other instruments of action which I use are passive, inanimate things, always yielding to force, and never discovering the least sign of an inward, self-determining principle. This distinction runs through the whole universe, as far as we are acquainted with it, and all the knowledge we have of being, our own or any other, leads us to discern the essential, irreconcilable contrariety of spontaneous acting to blind necessity. It follows that if there be any things or appearances which we judge to be effects in the world, and who can help observing a multitude of them, to attribute them to unintelligent necessity is to attribute them to what we can have no notion of as a cause at all, and to say that such necessity is universal is to say there is not, nor can be, any such thing as a cause, or it is to deny the possibility of action. It is still to be remembered that the necessity here spoken of is only such as excludes intelligence and design. The question concerning necessary agency in another sense, that is, whether an intelligent agent acts so necessarily that it is impossible in the event he should act otherwise than he does, whatever the reason be, this question, I say, is entirely different, and not concerned in the controversy with atheists. For supposing it to be determined in the affirmative, still it leaves us the idea of intelligent active power as a proper cause producing effects, and, with respect to the formation and order of the universe, the idea of an intelligent active power equal to the production of such an effect, which is what we mean by the deity. But to attribute operation to undesigning necessity is to attribute it to an abstract notion, and to confound all our ideas of cause and effect. And how can a man, who is as fully convinced of active power in himself as of his own existence, and in the same manner, that is, by being conscious of it, reason with him who denies the being and even the possibility of such a power? And how absurd an assertion must it appear that nothing at all, not the least being in nature, nor any mode or quality, not so much as the least motion, could possibly, by an antecedent necessity, independent on design, have been otherwise than it is? Can a man believe this, who sees such marks of indifferency in a multitude of things, so many changes in the face of nature, and knows that so many depend on his own choice? The notion of chance, so far as it relates to the present subject, arises wholly from men's ignorance of causes, as we see very often in the world many changeable appearances, which, by the novelty, variety, and other circumstances of them, we can't help believing to be effects, but not being particularly determined by any necessity, nor yet by the intention of any agent which we can observe. The word chance is substituted in the place of the unknown cause, and this may be sufficient for some purposes, for which the knowledge of causes is of no importance. But in an inquiry concerning the origin of things, to apply chance as a kind of hypothesis to solve the appearances of nature, and account for the order of the world, is evidently absurd, for the word so applied can have no other signification than ignorance, or nothing at all, though in some men's minds, at least in their manner of expressing themselves, there seem to be entirely inconsistent ideas confusedly jumbled together as the signification of it. For they seem to imagine a kind of efficiency at the same time that there is no certain determinate cause, which it is impossible for them to know. That is, they most absurdly attribute a real uncertain efficacy to nothing, to an empty sound, or a vague undetermined notion, when, if they would examine their thoughts, they would find that the true meaning of chance is only, we don't know what. Thus we see the atheistic schemes concerning the formation of the world in order and appearances, instead of giving a rational, intelligible account, are founded only in ignorance, and indeed are aversive of true human knowledge. The one of them, necessity, destroys the very idea of intelligent and designing activity, which is as clear to our minds as any idea can be, being perceived by an inward consciousness. The other, chance, is an utter absurdity, made up of inconsistent notions, and really meaning nothing but ignorance. But I will not content myself with arguing thus against the hypothesis of the atheists in general. Let us allow more than they have any pretense in reason to demand. Let us suppose necessity to stand for something, whose operation is like that of material causes, improperly so called, which affect appearances by an undirected impulse, or without the interposition of any design. A constant uniformity, however, must be included in the idea of such operation. For necessity, whether it be applied to existence, power, or whatever else, admits of no change, no interruption, no variety either in kind or degree. And let chance, however inconsistently, be supposed to be something, we don't know what, which operates, but its operation is not determined, either by a natural necessity or by counsel. Now, if neither of these hypotheses, between which atheists have been divided, some choosing the one, some the other, and a different atheistical hypothesis never has been, nor can be devised, but if, I say, neither of them can reasonably be admitted in accounting for the being and disposition of things, as in fact they appear, there is then nothing left to rest in, but the contrivance and agency of an intelligent cause. But that neither of these hypotheses does answer the professed design, viz., to explain the formation and order of the world, I shall endeavour to show clearly from the common appearances which cannot possibly have escaped the most careless observer. Whatever way we turn our eyes, to whatever part of the universe, or the whole of it which is visible to us, the face of nature has these two characters, which no one can help observing. It is various and it is uniform. The former is a convincing argument against necessity, and the latter against chance. First, there appears in the visible frame of nature a great variety. When we look up to the heavens in the day, our sight, piercing through a thin pellucid medium, terminates in a vast azure concave, without any diversity, only that we see in it a great luminous fiery globe, which we conclude to be the fountain of light, and sometimes interposed clouds, which, by observation and reason, we know to be only watery exhalations from the earth, gathered together in a region not far distant from us, and when they are condensed, falling down again in rain. But when we turn our eyes the same way at night, the prospect is quite changed, and a new scene presented to us. The great ruling luminary of the day is withdrawn, and in his stead there are seen numberless lesser lights, among them one larger than the rest, with various appearance, conspicuous but pale, and shining with a faint and borrowed lustre. This is the constantly changing appearance of the heavens in every diurnal revolution, besides other periodical alterations in the course of the sun and the moon, which everyone must observe. In our own globe, which our eyes can more accurately survey, there appears a much greater diversity, a vast collection of waters, supplied by perpetual currents, dispersed in several channels, continually flowing into it. On the solid part where we live, here mountains and rocks, there plains and valleys. In one place stately groves, in another flowery meadows, or fields covered with corn, all stocked with numerous inhabitants. The sea stored with fishes of surprisingly various shapes and sizes, the dry land with as great a diversity of beasts, and the air with fowls. I do not speak now of the mutual relations of these things, the suitableness of one to another, and the convenient, regular disposition of all, which must strike an attentive mind with a sense of natural beauty in the whole, and lead it to the acknowledgment of wisdom and goodness in the author. But upon the most indifferent superficial view, which presents to us such an amazing variety, and without looking narrowly into the composition of particular beings, which greatly increases it, let any man think, if he can, that blind, undesigning necessity has produced such a multiform appearance. The operation of necessary causes, if they must be called causes, is always alike, and admits of no changes. The mechanical powers of springs, weights, and wheels, and other instruments of motion, are exerted uniformly. Fire is another necessary corporeal agent, which operates always in the same manner, though it has different effect according to the different texture of the bodies into which it penetrates, causing some parts to ascend in smoke and flame, reducing some to ashes, and making some liquid or malleable. To give these and such like instruments that diversity of operation, which is necessary to answer even the low purposes of human art, and the conveniences of human life, there must be, we know, a superior intending cause to guide the application of them. But that such necessary causes, as senseless atoms should, out of themselves, without any skill in the application of their force or the interposal of any intelligent direction, produce such a wonderful variety as there is in the visible appearance of the world, the liquid waters and the more fluid air of a different constitution, the strangely subtle and penetrating light, the solid earth and the firmer rocks, the almost infinite kinds of vegetables, diverse in shape, color, flower, and fruit, not only the many species of animals and the numberless individuals, each entire, but the yet more various parts of their composition, the solid and the fluid, the organs of motion and sensation. This is such a paradox, it must be an understanding of a very odd make that can believe it. The atheist may next betake himself to chance, which is capricious enough and variable to answer the greatest imaginable or possible diversity of productions, if it be admitted to have any share in them. Necessity is limited, and must always produce exactly similar and unvarying effects. But fickle chance is tied down to no rule of operation, if it can operate at all. Supposing it to determine the existence and the order of things, what should hinder the diversity which there is in the world, nay, an infinitely greater diversity? Why may not water and air and light and rocks and animals and vegetables, all kinds of substances, and all possible qualities be jumbled together? But as the variety which there is in the appearances of nature is an invincible argument against their being the production of necessary causes, an equally strong objection lies against the hypothesis of chance, namely their uniformity. Everyone must be sensible that this is as truly the character of the face of nature as the other. Whenever we turn our eyes to the heavens, they have the same uniform aspect as when we viewed them before. The sun and the moon and the stars hold their places and go on constantly in their courses, producing a regular succession of day and night, summer and winter. One would think they continue after an ordinance and are subject to a law rather than guided by giddy hazard. In our lower world, not only, quote, the hills are everlasting, end quote, and, quote, the rocks not removed out of their place, end quote, but the waters, however easily yielding to force, keep their perpetual channels, and the whole self-balanced globe hangs in loose fluid air, which has no strength to support it. The tender herbs, which seem to die every winter, revive again in the spring, and cover the earth with a renewed verdure. The living things of so brittle a frame and short-lived, yet do not quite disappear and give way to different kinds, which, being equally possible, have an equal chance for production, if chance ruled, but the same species are perpetuated in a constant succession. If this argument were pursued more minutely, it would still appear the stronger. If we do not take the works of nature in the gross, and content ourselves with a bare view of their outsides, but examine their interior constitution, the evidence against hazard in their formation will still increase, for it must be plain to everyone that the more complicated any pieces of work, machines or systems are, design is still the more apparent in their similarity. But the most obvious view is sufficient to our purpose. For let any man consider whether he would not make a difference between heaps of sand and stones huddled together in confusion and a regular building, between a fortuitous jumble of pieces of brass, iron, and lead, and a well-going clock, between a mob or a tumultuous assembly of men without any order, and a well-formed political society, or a well-disciplined army. Let him consider, I say, whether he would not make a difference in these cases, presuming there was counsel and design in some, and not in others. And now, if we apply the same reasoning to the works of nature, whereas, upon the supposition of chance, there is infinite to one against any certain determined production, for chance ranges unguided to the utmost verge of possibility, when, in fact, we see amidst an almost infinite variety of things, there is such an obvious constant uniformity in the appearances of the world, is it not surprising that it should ever have entered into the mind of any man to exclude design and attribute all to chance? The argument so far as we have proceeded seems to be fully conclusive, and we may confidently rest in it as proved that neither the hypothesis of chance nor of undesigning necessity can account for the appearances of the universe. But we shall be more directly convinced that there is manifested intelligence and design in the frame of the mundane system, if, in the next place, we consider what the ancients called the beautiful and harmonious, the regular and convenient, the amiable and good, with which the world everywhere abounds. This point admits of a large illustration. All the discoveries which have been made in astronomy, natural philosophy, and natural history, tending to show that there is a fitness in things, a correspondence in the parts of the world, one answering to another so as to demonstrate wise contrivance and unity of design in the whole. There is not one region of the universe of which we have any knowledge, the heavens, the air, the earth, or the sea, not one entire particular being which we have the means of inquiring narrowly into, one fish, one fowl, one beast, or one tree. There is not one of all these that does not appear to be artificially made, and does not, by the exact proportion and harmony of its parts, discover design in the whole of its constitution. And indeed, in these last ages particularly, men of leisure and penetration have so happily employed their time and their understandings in the study of nature, as to set the argument in a very clear light, proving beyond all rational contradiction the wisdom and goodness of God in his works, to the utter confusion of those who are either so stupidly blind or obstinately wicked as not to, quote, regard the operation of his hands, end quote. But I shall only insist on those things which every understanding must discern, the appearances which every eye sees, or the observations of fact which must occur to the most unattentive of mankind, who has but common sense, for even they will be sufficient to establish this great truth upon. Let us first consider the visible world at large, as it appears to a naked eye, and to a plain, unimproved understanding. No man of the meanest capacity, and the lowest way of thinking, can be ignorant that there is a relation between the parts of the universe, that from the sun there is a communication of light and heat to the earth, which is the apparent cause of the various productions upon its surface, and of so manifold use to its inhabitants, that they could not subsist without it. By that genial warmth tender plants of different kinds spring up from small seeds, and are nourished, some into strong stalks, some into low shrubs, and some into stately trees, all bearing fruits which are the food of animals. And among animals there is an order and mutual usefulness, the other kinds being in subordination to man, who, by the prerogative of his superior nature, claims a dominion over their labors and their lives. To man particularly, and to other living things proportionably to the lower purposes of their being, the light of the sun is so comfortable and so useful that we cannot conceive how the ends of a life, constituted as ours is, could be answered and its conveniences obtained without it. But that light and the nourishing heat with which it is accompanied is so conveniently distributed as in the best manner to illuminate and animate the whole earth, the globular figure of which requires a diurnal rotation, that all the dwellers on it may be supplied in their turns, nor do any of them, especially not the principal, suffer by the darkness they are overspread with, whilst the sun visits others with his benign influences. So night gives man a necessary vacation from the labors of the day. But no one can avoid observing the changes of the seasons, occasioned by the annual, apparent, course of the sun. If he kept one perpetual track, the greatest part of the earth must be uninhabited, either by reason of excessive heat or cold. The gloomy regions never visited by him must be shut up in continual darkness and impenetrable frost, while the climates to which his beams should still directly fall must be quite burnt up, yielding no sustenance for man or beast. But instead of these extremes, how commodiously is this great business dispensed, by the fixed periodical revolution of the great orb in a yearly course, so directed as to prevent, so far as can be, the excesses both of heat and cold, and produce the grateful and useful variety of summer and winter, seed time and harvest. Again, if we take but even a slight view of this lower world itself, we shall see an admirable correspondence between its parts. However different they are, yet every one fitted to another, and to all the rest, so as to make the whole a convenient dwelling place for the several tribes of animals which live upon it, and for mankind especially. The solid earth supports our heavy bodies. The thin air we breathe is absolutely necessary to our preservation, and no one can be ignorant of how manifold use water is, not only more remotely by serving the purposes of vegetation, but by the immediate refreshment it gives, and as a means of the decent and comfortable enjoyment of life. Every element has its proper inhabitants, which, by the peculiar make and organization of their bodies, are adapted to it. The fishes have fins, the land animals feet and legs, and even the groveling reptile is furnished with the proper instruments of its slow motion. All these, so various that the kinds of them can scarcely be numbered, have food convenient for them, and everything which is suitable to their several natures. Now, even upon this general imperfect view, let any man judge whether there be not clear evidence of contrivance and design in the formation of our world. Indeed, whether it does not appear such a regular connected system, as considering the infinite variety of its parts, all of them so exquisitely fitted to each other, and disposed in such exact order as to make a perfect harmony in the whole, whether, I say, considering this, any understanding less than infinite could have formed the model. This is so plain, I do not think it needful to use many words in illustrating it. The truth is, I cannot help concluding that without the most unaccountable infatuation or perverseness, everyone must acknowledge it. Surely it would be far less absurd to imagine that the most curious machine ever framed by human art, the most beautiful edifice, the finest picture, or the most delightful musical harmony, that these, any or all of them, made themselves, by a merely casual mixture of their parts, than that this stupendous and most artificial fabric of the universe arose from nothing, or from rude, utterly indisposed materials, by undirected necessity or hazard. Before we proceed any further, let us stop here to make one obvious reflection, or rather indulge ourselves in those thoughts which will naturally arise. The human mind is so constituted as to have a pleasing sense of beauty in order, proportion, and harmony particularly, as it is thereby led to apprehend wisdom and good design in the contrivance. It is this which affords so various and delightful entertainment from the curious productions of the artist's hand, but first of his mind. One admires statuary, another architecture, another gardenings. Others are delighted with the compositions which are merely the work of genius, without any gross materials, such as poetry and history. But still it is the regularity that pleases, the proportion of the parts, and the harmony of the whole. And the more complicated and various the matter or the subject is, it is the more pleasing, provided the regularity be apparent. Why then should we not admire the beauties of nature? Nay, don't we all agree that those are the most beautiful works of art, which copy the most exactly after nature, and are the truest imitation of her original forms? Let us therefore fix our thoughts in a steady contemplation of the world about us. View it in this light as a regular, finished system, discovering exquisite skill in the exact proportion of all its parts, and a perfect symmetry in the whole. In vain shall we seek for beauty, harmony, and order in the productions of human genius. If we turn our eyes with attention to all things around us, in their simple, natural appearance, the idea of a nobler regularity and more grand design will arise in our minds. Is there any image made by painting or sculpture equal to the human face and person? Any map or landscape to the natural soil itself diversified with real rocks and hills, tall trees in blossom or laden with fruit, and cattle ranging the wide pasture? How wonderful is the structure of a single animal, inimitable by art, its parts made according to exact measure, and so conveniently situated that every one performs its proper functions, useful to the whole. This animal has a near relation to the kind itself to other species, all in such a due disposition that every individual is provided for, living commodiously on this terrestrial globe, which continually receives its vital warmth whereby they are nourished from the far distant heavenly bodies, holding on their perpetual course. Here is a noble subject of meditation to a mind that delights in harmony and order. But whither will it lead us? Directly to the acknowledgement of perfect understanding in the universe, of all ruling wisdom, in conjunction with the most amiable goodness, the true, complete, original beauty, the fountain of all excellence and perfection. Quote, "Praise the Lord, all ye his works. Praise him, ye angels, and all his hosts. Praise him, sun and moon. Praise him, ye stars of light. Praise him, ye heavens of heavens, and ye waters that are above the heavens. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for he commanded, and they were created. He hath also established them forever. He hath made a decree which shall not pass. Praise the Lord from the earth, ye dragons and all deeps, fire and hail, snow and vapor, stormy wind fulfilling his word, mountains and all hills, fruitful trees and all cedars, beasts and all cattle, creeping things and flying fowl, kings of the earth and all people, princes and judges, both young men and maidens, old men and children. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for his name alone is excellent. His glory is above the earth and heaven." End quote. Quote, "O Lord, how manifold are thy works! In wisdom thou hast made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. So is the great and wide sea, wherein are things creeping innumerable, both great and small beasts. These wait all upon thee, that thou mayest give them their meat in due season. That thou givest them they gather. Thou openest thy hand. Thou art filled with good." End quote. Therefore, let every one of us resolve with the devout psalmist, quote, "I will sing unto the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God while I have being." End quote.